Pasuk in Tehillim, Parakuf Chafav, Pasuk Hey tells us, Hazerim Badima Barina Iksaru. Whoever plants with tears, he reaps with joys. And it's a very, very powerful analogy. Crying over a field, I'm sure that tears are not so beneficial for plants. I'm sure that they contain chemical properties which are not good for plants. But the analogy is quite clear that there's planting on a field, but there's also planting in life. We plant in life. And when you come to places here, like here, such as the Kaisel, there's a place to plant with tears. As I mentioned many times recently, I was by two of my Gedali Rabbanim, Rav Moshe Sternbach and Rav Tzvi Kushelevsky, and they both told me the same exact thing. I walked into Rav Moshe Sternbach and he said, Tefillah will not help. And I was scared. I hadn't even asked my question yet. I was coming in to ask a question. I said, Tefillah won't help. I said, so what should I do? He said, you need Tchina. I said, what's the difference between Tchina and Tefillah? He said, Tchina is with tears. Tchina is with tears. You need to daven with tears. Because if you plant with tears, then you'll reap with joy. Then you'll reap with joy. And this is something that we have to know. Tefillah is called Avodah Shebalev. Avodah Shebalev, the service of the heart. How do we serve Hashem with our hearts? Because the heart is a very interesting organ. It keeps us alive, keeps our heart, it keeps our blood moving and oxygenated. But the heart is the source, is the seat of the ruach, the middle part of the neshama, which is called the ruach. It's the nefesh, ruach, and neshama. The ruach sits in the heart, and the ruach is our emotional side, our verbal side. The Gra, the Vilna Gaon writes that most of our interaction with the world is through our ruach, and the ruach allows us to come to tears. It allows us to arouse our emotion and come to tears. And if something is really, really important, one way we show something is very dear to our heart is by coming to tears. And that's why Azurim Medima Barina Iksaru, that if tears is not a siba, it's not a cause, it's a simon, it's a sign. Tears are a sign that something is really, truly dear to our heart. And we've worked on our heart to such an extent that we recognize the great need for it. For example, a person cries for their shidduch. They cry for a fuah shalema. They cry because they're just lost. They don't know what they're supposed to be doing with their life. Whatever reason, they cry because of shalom bayis, fighting with their spouse. They cry because their child is not following the way of Torah. These four areas, which are my Rebbe demarcated: shalom bayis, parnasa, their livelihood, and their health, and their children. These four areas. Crying about them is a sign that we really care about them. And therefore, Azar Madim Marina Ksaro, a person who cries during the 9 days about the Beis HaMikdash, he's showing that it's really, really important to him. It's something so important. And it's a recognition that we really need it. And the more we recognize that we really need it, the more that our tefillahs will be accepted, number one. And number two is that when it comes back, we'll reap with joy. Because you only appreciate something if you have an appreciation. You only enjoy something if you have an appreciation for it. If I give a little kid $1 million, a check for $1 million, right? Like I have right here in my tefillin case, I have here a check for $1 million. And sometimes people ask me, I say, Rabbi Travis, why do you carry around a check for $1 million? I have this check here. It's a check for $1 million. The reason I have this check is because it occurred to me one time that for a large donation, I would do a lot of things, go far places, do a lot of things. So, what about putting on tefillin? It's worth at least $1 million. And every day I try, before putting on tefillin, to look at that check for $1 million and realize this mitzvah is worth much, much more than $1 million. If you look at the mitzvah that way, then you have some chance of appreciating what it's worth. Yeah? That's what Shlomo Melech tells us. Im tichapsenu kesef v'zav, az tav niras Hashem. If you look for it like gold and silver or like dollars, then you'll understand Yiras Hashem. So our job in this world is to recognize the importance of spiritual things, and especially things that we're lacking. And this is the avoda, this is the job of during the 9 days, to realize how much we're lacking. How much we're lacking without a Beis Hamikdash. As Yirmiyah, when he sat and cried, and he was confronted with Aristo, said, "You're such a wise person, why are you crying over some bricks that were destroyed?" Yirmiyah had Aristo ask him some very complicated questions in philosophy, which he answered. He said, "Now I'm even more confused. If you're such a wise person, why are you crying?" He said, "Because all my wisdom comes from these bricks. All bracha in the world, we have to know everything. A person's davening for parnasa, for livelihood, for shalom bayis, for domestic tranquility, for chinuch banim, for children to follow the ways of Torah, or for brios, for health. All of those things come from these bricks over here, from the Beis Hamikdash. And if we're able to churn up our hearts and cry for these bricks, then we have a chance to be zoicher, to merit getting the Beis Hamikdash back. If we don't cry for these bricks, then it's a sad story. We don't have much chance. When it comes back, we won't be happy. That's a zerin barina b'dima, a zerin b'dima barina iksar. If you sow with tears, then you'll reap with joy. So Hashem, in His great, great, infinite mercy, should help us. We should get their karbanos back, because when we have karbanos, our transgressions are wiped away, and we have to know the biggest impediment to our prayers is our transgressions, and that's why we start Shmon Ezra asking for Hashivenu Avinu Zerasecha Slach Lanu with those two brachas after Das. First we ask for Das, we have to know what to ask for, as the Birkei Yosef says. We start Shmon Esrei after the first three blessings of praise. We start with asking for understanding. We have to understand what to ask for. But after we know what to ask for, before we ask for anything, before we ask for Gal Yisrael, Rufeinu, Parnasa, we first ask for tshuva, because transgressions stop all of our tefillahs from being accepted. So when we get the Beis Hamikdash back and the karbanos, then we have a chance that our tefillah should be heard. Hashem should help us in His infinite, infinite mercy, should help us to get back to Beis Hamikdash quickly. Amen. Cain. Tieh.